I've discovered the most incredible method for teaching English. It's really fun, it develops speaking fluency, but you can use it to target almost every language skill. I'm Will from Enchanted ESL, and I love roleplay in the English classroom. And if you do too, then I found the holy grail for you. This is revolutionary and has mind-blowing potential. What I'm talking about is role-playing games. Now, I know I'm not the first to have done this, but I started it on my own and then looked on the internet and couldn't really find much about it. So over the years, I've been figuring it out myself and seeing incredible rewards. First of all, I must say this is not a technique that I've used with big classes or even medium-sized groups. It's great with individuals and small groups up to about 5 or 6. So if you're a private tutor or run an after-school club or something like that, this is perfect for you. You probably could do it with a full-sized classroom if you really thought about it, but I'm not at that stage yet. So what are role-playing games as opposed to just roleplay? Well, hopefully you know what roleplay is in the context of an English class. Students take on a role and act and speak as if they were that person. Often there's a problem to solve or a situation to advance. I have a whole series on how you can do it on this channel, and every month I send out new scenarios to newsletter subscribers. The benefits of roleplay is mostly speaking fluency. Students have to improvise and adapt and use their language in pretty relevant contexts. My students adore roleplay because they can take all that language they've been working hard studying and apply it in a situation that is fun and creative. Now, role-playing games take that idea and turn it up to 11. Instead of role-playing a situation that takes a few minutes, students act and speak in their role across multiple sessions. They tell a whole story in which they're the main characters. The decisions they make drive the entire story, and it can last for a long time. I play role-playing games as a hobby, and one of the games I've been playing, we play about 3 to 4 hours every week, and it's been going for a year and a half. The same story. And that's nothing compared to what some people do. But it's not the point of what we're doing in the English classes. We're not looking to make a super long story. Besides, we don't really have the time in our classes to do that. The point is we're creating this super engaging world and narrative in which students can't help but be engaged, and they practice so many English skills along the way. Think of it like a video game where they're the main characters. But there are no screens and there are no controllers. The game is done entirely by dialogue with other players. One person is the game master, and they're in charge of the rules and setting the scene. Everyone else plays a character, decides what that character does, and says it to the game master. Together you unfurl this story, which is not scripted, is completely improvised, and it has a lot of randomness thanks to the rolling of dice. And this is where it's a role-playing game instead of just roleplay. The most famous role-playing game by far is Dungeons & Dragons, which you've probably heard of at least, and maybe even played. Recently it's been made famous by Stranger Things and YouTube creators like Critical Role. As the name suggests, Dungeons & Dragons is all about going into caves, fighting monsters, slaying dragons, getting gold, and all of that kind of fantasy stuff. I've had great success playing it with some of my students. They've gone and they've slayed the dragon, they've done amazing quests and saved the world. You can adapt Dungeons & Dragons or play a completely different game in a completely different setting, like in space or Victorian London, where the focus is solving a mystery rather than killing the baddies. You can make pretty much any setting or situation you want into a role-playing game and it'll be super fun. But it's not just about having fun. Of course you want your students to be engaged, but in a role-playing game you're actually learning more than in a normal class, and I'll explain why. First of all, there's lots of speaking going on. There's a constant dialogue between the game master and the players. And it's engaging dialogue, it's not forced. Students want to interact with it to progress the story. For example, they need to get some gear to go climbing. So they go into a shop and they ask how much it costs. Can they get the right gear that they need? Can they haggle the price down to save a bit of cash? And what other information can they get from the shopkeeper? They'll interact with everyday citizens, make allies, make enemies, and find rival groups. They'll negotiate cities, explore the wilderness, solve puzzles, and unravel mysteries. Listening is important too because the game master describes the world. But this is not your boring listening exercises from a CD player. They'll hear about exciting missions and juicy gossip which will take them one step further in their adventure. You may have figured out by now that in an English class, the game master is going to be you, the teacher. It makes absolute sense. They referee the rules and set the scene. It may seem like a lot of work and a lot of things to think about, and it can be if you do it wrong. But done right, it can be an absolute breeze. But in the English class, you not only have to be the game master, but introduce a whole load of language. This is actually a great thing because you can make scenarios around target language and put them in front of your students, and they have to use that language to resolve the situation. Essentially what you're doing is taking a whole bunch of role-play scenarios and chaining them together in one long story. And it's not just about listening and speaking. Those are the two primary skills, but you can get loads of reading and loads of writing in there as well. For example, the players find a diary entry that holds all of the answers to the mystery. They have to read it very carefully to get those details. Or they're writing a letter to the Queen to tell her that her best friend is a spy. How can they write it in a diplomatic way and not offend her? Maybe they get a mysterious text message from an unknown person who claims to know the location of a clue. By going backwards and forwards in a written text conversation, they get more and more information. So if you plan things correctly, you can introduce loads of reading and loads of writing too. The one thing you can't really do in this system is grammar, at least not the traditional methods. You can put it into practice with the language that you try to get your students to use, but you can't force it in. There are no textbooks or worksheet exercises here. So if you do need to get some formal grammar done, then I suggest you do that outside of the game. I've been using tabletop role-playing games for years now. I started with a desert island survival encounter with a single student and then moved on to a fantasy adventure. Since then, I've played plenty of Dungeons & Dragons and also Tales from the Loop, which is a mystery game set in the 80s. Some of the lessons I've had using this system have been unbelievable. The confidence and fluency that students get after playing this for a while is simply beyond belief. And of course, I never have any issues with engagement or behaviour in class. The kids absolutely love it. It is my favourite and most effective technique. However, there are some big problems with some of the games I've been playing. Fortunately, I have a solution, which I'll talk about a bit later. But first, let's look at the problems. The main thing is, they're just too complicated. Dungeons & Dragons has a million rules, there's a bunch of crazy dice, and you can spend about 3 sessions just creating a character. And that can be a bit boring, to be honest. There are so many things you need to get to before you can start properly playing, and all of that time students are losing interest and you're not really learning that much English. There are other games, for example Tales from the Loop that I mentioned earlier, that are a lot less rulesy, but they still suffer from the second problem, which is they're not universally appealing. They're specific to a setting or a style of play which not everyone wants to do. Dungeons & Dragons is epic, you go around killing loads of massive monsters and it's a great time. I love it, but not all of my students do. Tales from the Loop is a kind of sci-fi mystery set in the 80s. Not everybody likes that either. Plus, it can be difficult for students to understand the world. The 80s is very unfamiliar for kids these days. They can't imagine a world with no mobile phone. And when it comes to a fantasy setting, there needs to be a lot of background understanding about what the rules of the world are. What is magic? Is there technology? What are the people like here? How do they live? So many factors like age and culture and background affect how they engage with a setting, and a lot of the time they just won't. And the third thing is there's quite a lot of work and stress for new game masters, or in your case teacher game masters, to understand how to do it all and incorporate all of that English. It's a lot of work and a lot of preparation which most of us teachers don't have enough time to do. Dungeons & Dragons, for example, takes me a long time to prepare situations when I'm not even doing it for English classes. You have to know all of the rules, all of the stats for all the monsters and the layout of all the caves. It's a lot, and it can be tricky to get the English in while your mind is occupied with all of those other things. I've suffered all these frustrations, and sometimes I've started a role-playing game with a group and it just hasn't worked. It didn't fit the needs of my students, they didn't connect with it, and they weren't engaging with the language properly. But I don't think it's a flaw with the idea of role-playing games, but the individual games themselves. I would not recommend you start with Dungeons & Dragons with an English class. It would be horrible. The thing is, after a lot of looking and searching and trying new things, I am yet to find the game that is perfect for English classes. So I decided to make one. I have designed a tabletop role-playing game specifically for use in English language classes. It is called the Enchanted Role-Playing Game. It is super simple, universally appealing, and allows teachers control over what language is used. So this video is going to be the first in a series documenting my design and experience of playtesting this game. It's currently September, that's the start of the school year here, and I'm going to be playing it throughout the year with a bunch of different classes. And over that time, I'll be explaining it to my new students, and as I do, I'll be explaining the ideas to you, and I'll be refining some of the rules to make it absolutely perfect. Now for the rest of this video, I'll be talking about my aims and principles when designing the game. It was super important to figure those things out first because they will inform all of the decisions, even the tiny little ones, that I make now and as I go forward. So the first principle, super important, is accessibility. I want everyone to be able to play this game no matter where they live, what their financial situation is like, and how they receive their English classes. That means all of the rules of the game will be completely free for any teacher to use. And the resources required will be very simple and will always have free options. For example, most famous role-playing games use these cool polyhedral dice. They are fantastic, but they cost and they can be off-putting at first. They're quite complicated. So the game will just use some basic 6-sided dice that everybody either has or can access digitally for free. The game must also be playable online because a whole load of students learn that way. Now in the early stages, online play will not be perfect, but once things get up and running, I'll be making some resources that teachers can use over the internet. The second really big principle is simplicity. We don't want a whole load of complicated rules that the students can't understand, and neither can the teacher. There's also got to be an absolute minimum of maths. So many role-playing games involve rolling a whole bunch of dice, adding them all together and adding loads of other numbers, and it takes ages, and just no. In this game, you'll just be rolling the dice and looking for numbers. There's no maths involved. Also, it won't take students long to come up with their character. Like 10 minutes maybe, and then you can get straight into playing the game. You don't have to wait 3 sessions to start playing like you do in Dungeons and Dragons. The third principle is reducing barriers to entry. That means, in the default at least, taking out any ideas of crazy magic or unfamiliar settings. The basic game is going to be set in the modern world. That being said, there will be some supernatural phenomena, but it'll all be things that are understandable. The general idea of this game is to solve mysteries rather than going around slaying monsters. I think that's more appealing because pretty much everybody likes a mystery, but not everybody likes going and killing things. You can include lots of puzzles and intrigue, or you can make it a bit more action-oriented, more like a thriller than a mystery. I also want the game to be age agnostic. The idea for me is to play it with kids and teenagers, so it'll be based around schools and university and that kind of thing. But you can also play it with adults in a work situation. The fourth thing is to keep the game short and sweet. As I said earlier, we're not telling stories that take hundreds and hundreds of hours like the YouTubers on Critical Role do. That's fantastic, but we just don't have the time to do that. In fact, in some sessions you might only have 10 or 15 minutes to play. So the system is set up to have short modular chunks in which a lot happens. The next principle is to have plenty of support for you, the teachers, game masters. There is going to be a very intuitive mystery/quest system in which you can plug in things that you want. It won't require lots of thinking and preparation to come up with a good one. Plus, I'll be coming up with loads of pre-made mysteries that you can just play with your students, and they'll have themes. For example, I'm making one at the moment about transport and another about food. This is great for teachers who don't have the time or inclination to come up with mysteries themselves. And after playing a few of them, you might be inspired to create your own. And later in this series, and probably with some extra videos as well, I'll be talking about how you can be a great game master teacher. It's not as daunting as you think, and you'll pick it up really quickly. Another huge principle specific to this design is incorporating English language into the mechanics of the game. Role-playing games already have a ton of emergent vocab acquisition. You just go around exploring things and learn the words for them as you go. As I said before, there are social interactions and loads of opportunities for reading and writing, but I want students to be mechanically motivated to use that language. So I'll be creating an entirely new system where students can add vocab and then get rewarded for using it in their speech and describing what their characters do. The rewards will be their characters and their team getting stronger and better. At this stage, I still need to do quite a lot of play testing on that, which is what I plan to do this year in my classes, but I'm pretty excited for it. The final principle is to make the game playable by groups and individuals. A lot of students have one-to-one tutoring and I want them to be able to play. So I'm designing it with the idea you can play with one game master teacher and one player student, or a group of students up to about the size of 6. Any more than that and it gets a bit chaotic and difficult to run. And with groups, there's a built-in teamwork mechanic that rewards working together and cooperating. Phew, that's a lot. I hope you like what you're hearing, and if you do, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button on this video. It helps it spread to loads of other amazing teachers and helps me continue making content like this. Thank you very much. This is so exciting. I can't wait to share this whole method with you and eventually get you start playing it as well. Over the course of this year, I'll be running through everything, my play testing, all of the design, and by the end of the year, I'll probably have a pretty refined product which I'll put out into the world. Of course, there's plenty more to get into, and most importantly, how the rules work and what those dice are for. And I'll get into that in the next video in this series. You should be able to find that video right here, but if it's not ready yet, then it'll be another game that you can try out in your classes, and I promise you it'll be fantastic. But for now, I've been Will from Enchanted ESL, wishing you all the joy and success in your teaching. See ya!